Well, welcome everybody to Bridging the Gap, Indigenous-led clean transportation for Saskatchewan's North. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that many of us are joining today from the ancestral lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Nakota, Dakota, Lakota, and Dene people, as well as the homeland of the Métis in Saskatchewan. My name is Mitch Carlson, and it has been my privilege to facilitate this campaign on behalf of Aurora Renewables and English River First Nation, with support from Natural Resources Canada. This is the 8th episode in our monthly webinar series, which will continue through to the end of this year. If you have any questions or comments during today's session, please enter them into the chat function and I'll do my best to answer them at the end. This session is being recorded and it will be posted on Aurora's YouTube channel. So today's session is going to be a little different from our previous webinars. Rather than focusing on one specific topic, I'm going to take some time to look back at what we've covered so far in the campaign, share some updates of what's going to be happening in the future and where we're headed next. Before I get into that, I thought I'd provide a little bit of background on who I am and why I'm involved in this work. So originally I'm from Craik, Saskatchewan. I received my engineering degree from the University of Regina and spent much of the first half of my career in the energy sector with Sask Energy, working in a variety of engineering, customer service, and business development roles. So in 2016, I founded MC Consulting, which is a management consulting firm that helps organizations design and implement sustainable energy strategies. My work focuses on responsible resource management, fostering sustainable energy practices, and delivering practical low-carbon energy solutions. My approach combines advocacy, education, change leadership, and project management. And increasingly, a big part of that work has been helping organizations and communities understand the opportunities presented by clean transportation solutions and how to overcome the barriers that can make adoption challenging. And that's really what this Bridging the Gap campaign is all about, providing practical information to better understand what clean transportation can look like in Saskatchewan. So when NRCan established the program supporting this campaign, one of the barriers that they identified was to greater adoption to zero-emission vehicles was the gap in knowledge and firsthand experience. And I think that that's particularly relevant in Saskatchewan and even more so into northern Saskatchewan. So there are some legitimate questions about whether electric vehicles can fit our needs. Like, how much do they cost? How do they perform in extreme cold? Do they have enough range? Can I use them to haul and tow? These are all fair questions, and we're hoping to answer them by providing information from people who have experience with them, the first-hand experience, and can speak to the many benefits of moving to electrified transport, because there are several benefits to make that switch. A quote from one of our guest panelists, Louise Levesque from Electric Mobility Canada, captured it pretty well, what we should be trying to accomplish with this campaign. She said, what's really important is getting out and providing information to people who are curious about EVs and creating more curiosity for those who may not be curious yet. So we're not trying to tell everyone that you need to go out and buy an electric vehicle today. We're trying to provide the useful information, create that curiosity, and give people an opportunity to hear directly from people who actually have that experience with these technologies. And a large part of this, as Tim Burrows from the Electric Vehicle Society noted, is addressing the many myths and misconceptions about electric vehicles. So ultimately, we want to allow people and communities to make informed decisions for themselves. And in northern Saskatchewan, there's another important part of this conversation. It's about having the opportunity to choose in the first place. These images come from PlugShare, the app that shows public charging locations in Canada. It's focusing here in on Saskatchewan. The image on the left includes both level 2 chargers and DC fast chargers, and the image on the right is filtered for just the DC fast charging network in Saskatchewan. So as you can see, there's a decent level of coverage in major centers and along major highways. But the reality is that in some parts of the country, EV ownership would be very difficult at this time. The situation for those who live in rural Saskatchewan, and particularly those in the north, is very different than that of urbanites. So if there isn't charging infrastructure in your community, or if you've never had the opportunity to drive an EV, if you're uncertain about the technology and what vehicles are available, and if they're going to meet the needs of your northern conditions, then you may not feel that you have that same choice that someone living in larger centers with more established EV infrastructure and access to vehicles might have. So part of what we're doing with Bridging the Gap is simply helping to create that choice. And Aurora Renewables will be working with northern communities to establish more charging infrastructure in the north to quite literally bridge the gap in coverage and help groups like English River First Nation have access to electric vehicles. Now, of course, for these communities in the north, there are other reasons that they're interested in pursuing clean transportation. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions is super important to them and it's a big part of this conversation. So transportation accounts for a significant share in Canada's emissions, and transitioning to zero emission vehicles is part of Canada's broader emissions reduction strategy. Transitioning to electric vehicles is also one way that individuals and communities can have a major impact and contribute. So English River First Nations knows all too well the impact of climate change. During last year's fire season, several communities in the Beauval region were evacuated for over 2 months as fires went through their region. But I think one of the things that we've been learning and hearing about throughout this series is that the case for clean transportation is much broader than emissions alone. It has to do with energy costs, it has to do with the operating costs and the total cost of ownership of the vehicles. It's also about identifying the use cases that are going to work best for electric vehicles as the technology continues to evolve. And it's about developing infrastructure that allows the ease of electrified transport in Saskatchewan's climate and geography. And there are plenty of tools and resources available to help out. So with that in mind, I want to spend a little bit of time looking back at some of our discussions, what we've heard from our guests in the first 7 episodes, and kind of walking through some of the resources that we've collected to help people make these informed decisions. I think a good place for us to start is to go into the Aurora Renewables website. So I'm just going to pull that up on screen here and we'll walk through it together. So here we are at aurorarenewables.ca/EV campaign. And again, this is where you can see all about our webinars, watch our past episodes. So if you want to go back and rewatch or some of the videos or watch for the first time, this link will take you to our YouTube page, which is right up here. So if you go back in, here's all of our 7 episodes that we've provided to date. And if you are new to it, if it's your first time, I would recommend specifically to jump into take a look at episode number 3 here in March. This is where Kenneth Becorb gave an introduction, a really nice, succinct introduction about electric vehicle technology itself in his EV 101 session. So if we jump back into Aurora's website and scroll down, this is where our resource section is too. So we've been collecting a library of useful resources with links to other locations, to other groups here. So let's take a look at what we've got going on. So for example, if you're looking to find the latest news from our national advocacy groups, you can take a look at that would be Electric Mobility Canada, Electric Autonomy Canada, Plug and Drive, and the Electric Vehicle Society. So again, we've got links to all their websites here, and it gives you a good opportunity to learn more about the work that they're doing. And each of them have a whole bunch of resources. So let's just, take a look at what's Electric Mobility Canada's got going on. And here's some notable news relevant to the prairies from Electric Mobility Canada. They just recently announced that they've received some new funding for a zero emission vehicle awareness initiative for 2 projects. And one of that appears to be the launch of a new regional hub that will be in the prairies, taking into account Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And it appears that the goal of this is to equip fleet operators with the knowledge and the confidence to understand how to efficiently initiate charging infrastructure projects. So not a lot of details at this time, but hopefully we hear more about that soon. So good news for the prairies is we're getting some more, there'll be more activity coming into here. If we look at Electric Autonomy Canada, one of the things that you find here is that they typically provide the latest industry news. So it's a good place to kind of keep up to date of what's going on. And that includes, the release of any new electric vehicles that are making their way into the Canadian market. For example, here there's an article about the new Kia EV3, which is one of the least expensive EVs in Canada, coming in at under $40,000. So good to see some of these lower cost EVs making their way into the Canadian market. Plug and Drive is a bit unique in that they're an organization that if you're a community that is wanting to get firsthand experience with EV, you can talk to them about organizing a test drive event to bring to your community. So Plug and Drive is the place to go for that. They take their electric vehicle roadshow across the country each year and have been in various locations in Saskatchewan from time to time as well. The Electric Vehicle Society is a place to go if you're looking to connect with any local societies. So they've got their listing of all the local, regional EV societies, including here is the Sask EV out of Saskatoon and the Saskatchewan Electric Vehicles Association out of Regina. So they're the place to come to find your local contacts. The other interesting thing about them is they also have their own YouTube channel, a webinar series called Canada Talks Electric Cars. That's hosted by our friend Tim Burrows. They're at over 80 episodes already, it looks like. And they cover topics ranging from a variety of things from, specific component level aspects of the technology themselves, from motors and batteries, all the way up to the impacts of the latest policy related to electrified transport. So I encourage you, here's another place to take a look through and browse. If you're looking for any more content, browse through there and see if anything catches your eye. Again, for more local content, we've got Sask EV and the SEVA Association, the Electric Vehicle Association. Sask EV is more based out of the Saskatoon region. So their website will talk about events, kind of in that area. And SEVA is more so based in the Regina, focused around the Regina region. They both got some great information on their website, so be sure to browse through that. SEVA especially has just updated their website with a bunch of new information, including a brand new EV database. So if you're looking to browse around at what electric vehicle models are out there in Canada, this is one of the places to go. I would also recommend going back to Plug and Drive's website. So here's another option to look at. They've got an updated version of their EV Finder. Again, go around and browse and take a look at what's available, what prices, what specifications. And the other good place that I find is evsearch.ca. They've got their own platform here with electric vehicle database, as well as some important information about educational materials about EVs as well. And then if you do happen to find an EV that is catching your eye and you want more information and would like to do a bit of a virtual test drive of it, I would recommend checking out the EV Revolution Show YouTube channel. And again, that's our friend Kenneth Bacour who operates that. He's got over 290 episodes now and has pretty much covered every vehicle in the Canadian market. So feel free to just browse through and take a look of any specific model. So if I wanted to see more about the Silverado EV truck, yeah, sure enough, he's got an episode on that, and they're about half an hour each, and he goes through all the specifications. You can ride along with them in a bit of a virtual test drive. So again, all of that information, all of that is linked here on our website, so you don't have to kind of find them for yourselves. Just come to aurorarenewables.ca EV campaign, and you can find links to all of these sites here. So just jumping back into the presentation. In addition to the resource library, we've also been out working and providing materials to share with individuals, communities, and businesses at certain live events. We've been working and participating with SEVA and Sask EV, presenting information that we believe is of value for those who might be new to the sector. And one of the examples of this is to look at the performance specifications and the total cost of ownership of various electric vehicles compared to their gasoline counterpart. And we think that that's, again, a viable way to look at and address some of the myths that might be out there related to EVs themselves. So my first attempt at this actually proved to be by far one of the single most viewed and discussed LinkedIn posts that I've ever had. So you can see here it got nearly 40,000 impressions and over 100 comments. So that generated a lot of interesting discussion. The initial intent was really just to provide a side-by-side comparison of the performance specifications because a lot of times you hear that, well, EVs are just glorified golf carts. They're not, they're not real vehicles. But as you can see that in a lot of the most important specification categories, they actually outperform their gasoline counterparts. So we wanted to make that clear that the technology here that we're talking about is really impressive. And if you talk to any EV owner out there, they're going to say that, they love it. But if you talk to someone who's never driven an EV, you're likely to hear some of these comments or varieties thereof that, they're not affordable. They don't have enough range. You can't tow anything with an EV. But EV owners are, they know a different story and they know the reality of it. So in addition to the performance, we're also wanting to capture, well, what does the total cost of ownership look like? And really, this was looking at it from more the economic evaluation from a cash flow perspective rather than just the upfront cost. And I think that's really important because I feel like, to me, cash flow is a more appropriate evaluation of affordability than just upfront cost. You think about it as an investment. So, um, and again, today's reality, EVs have really, it's a superior performance specification in many categories. Even in range, the range in some vehicles is getting equivalent or surpasses what can be available in a gasoline model in certain versions. So um, this is the result of the first draft on screen. And again, it was just an example to start the conversation. And I was estimating that an EV version of the Silverado work truck, for example, could save over $10,000 over 10 years. So not everyone had agreed with these initial results. And in fairness, this version was a bit of a quick and dirty assessment. The version didn't account for certain things like winter driving losses, public charging costs, the costs of a home charger, or the end resale value. And so these are all fair points. And I wanted to do another version of this. So I took the feedback and created a more detailed model and wanted to put the results out. So I'll share now the results of that new model. And in doing so, I want to be clear that the model contains numerous assumptions and they could be debated until the cows come home. But I feel that it provides a pretty good starting point for the discussion. So are the updated results with the key assumptions listed here on the side. So as before, all performance specifications about the vehicle performance comes from the OEM's website. So in this case, General Motors Canada, except for the vehicle efficiency rating, which I took from NRCan. Fuel price comes from the current average price of gasoline in Saskatchewan, which is taken from Gas Buddy, and that's sitting currently at $1.67 per liter. The cost of charging now assumes that 80% of charging is done at home at a rate of 17 cents per kilowatt hour, and 20% of public is done at public fast charging stations at 65 cents per kilowatt hour. And those numbers were taken from evrecharge.ca. The emissions information is based on Environment and Climate Change Canada numbers. So any of that efficiency ratings come directly from basically what Saskatchewan's grid looks like versus the emissions of burning gasoline. And remember, Saskatchewan doesn't have the cleanest grid with the coal and natural gas as part of it, and there's still a significant emissions savings here. I went with a 7-year financing at 4% for each vehicle with $0 down. I also this time included a fuel efficiency factor to contribute for losses for weather for both extreme cold and extreme heat. And I did that for both versions. So I did that for the ICE vehicle, internal combustion engine vehicle, as well as the electric vehicle. So they both have a D rating on their range, somewhat more so with the electric vehicle as it is more impactful, specifically in winter driving. So in addition to the financing rates, I also included $1,000 for home charger installation for those who might be first-time EV owners. You're probably going to want to have a charger at home, and that's to allow you to take advantage of those low-cost home charging, which is so important to make the savings work out. I would note, however, that I haven't included any charging rebates that are available from some home charging companies. So that doesn't take into consideration this, but I can show you the impact of that as we get closer, take a closer look into the model. And then the other thing is I have included the $300 Sask EV road use charge. So that's to make up for EV owners not contributing to fuel surcharge tax for roads. So Saskatchewan was one of the only provinces, I think, to have that implemented, but it is a reality in Saskatchewan. So I have included that now. And then we talk about retained or resale value. So the numbers that I've seen suggest currently that gasoline vehicles do retain a little bit more value than electric vehicles, between 35 and 40% compared to 25 to 30%. It will be interesting to see how that plays out over the next 10 years when we have another decade's worth of EV data to understand how EVs perform in the long term, which will be more valuable 10 years from now. I guess only time will tell. But for now, I'll take what I've seen published. So also, I maintain that no battery replacement is required for a 10-year ownership period. EVs typically come with an 8-year or 160,000 kilometer battery replacement warranty, and all the data shows that battery health is likely to be 80% or more even after 10 years. So with all that in mind, the new result, while not as favorable as my initial estimate, was that the EV still comes out on top with a total savings of over $5,000 after 10 years. And again, I'd like to point out that this, in some ways, is kind of one of the worst case scenarios for EV ownership because Saskatchewan has a relatively low cost of gasoline and a relatively high cost of electricity. So if EVs can work, if this math works here in Saskatchewan, it's going to work even better in other places where cost of power might be lower and cost of gasoline is higher, for BC, for example. Um, so here's a bit of a snapshot of what it looks like, but to help provide maybe a little more context of what this looks like from an investment perspective, I'm going to pull up the model that I've created. It's here itself, and it will a bit of more of a visual representation. And apologies, I know there's a lot of information on this screen right now. But I'll try and focus in on a couple things. So first of all, we're going to highlight cell K26 here, and this is the number that was shown at the bottom of the previous screen. So this is your total cumulative EV advantage, the savings that you would get over 10 years from an electric vehicle. So that's summed up here. This is visually represented year by year in the cash flow here. And again, we're starting in a negative position only because we've got that requirement to purchase an EV charger. So you're starting out negative, but you're slowly gaining um, on savings here until you pay off the vehicles, and then that dramatically increases. So what happens if you moved into a place that had an EV charger, or it came with a new home, or you got a charger installed for free or for lower cost? If we delete that, this is where you're automatically starting in a positive position and only increasing going forward. But I'm going to just add that back in as we take a closer look here at some of the factors. So if we look at columns D here and compared to column H, this is really your net cash flow of owning a gasoline vehicle here in D, and an electric vehicle in H. And the difference between those two is identified here. So again, for the first few years of ownership, it's relatively cost parity. And that is because you've got a lower financing rate for your gasoline vehicle compared to your EV due to your higher cost of purchase to purchase an EV. But that's made up because you've got lower cost of operating, specifically and most importantly through your lower cost of fuel. And that's where it shows up here. So you're slowly gaining back, your initial investment until you get that vehicle paid off in year 7. And anything going forward becomes dramatic savings, where you're close to $2,700 a month in save or a year, sorry, in savings. And that's where you start to accumulate. And then so you can imagine the longer you own the vehicle, the better off you're going to be. So that gives, I hope, like a bit more of a visual representation on this. And I wanted to do a couple other things just to kind of give you a sense of, again, this model is really just to help people to understand what that investment could look like and compare vehicles as they're going. And I think it, in a lot of ways, it breaks down some of the myths, but it really should be a tool that people can use as they're evaluating. And I'm thinking specifically for municipalities that might be looking to, update their fleet. How do they know if it's going to, be a better business decision? So what we can do is we can kind of manipulate some of the factors. So I want you to keep an eye here on this value in the corner, and again on the chart here. And one of the important things, again, I've set this as assuming that there's 16,000 kilometers traveled per year. But that's one of the key factors, is how much do you drive? So the more you drive, the more benefit you're going to get because the cost of fuel is so low. So let's, for example, just increase this from 16,000 to 18,000. So I'm going to off screen, I'm going to update that factor. All of a sudden, you're jumping up to significant savings. You've jumped up from 5,500 to nearly 10,000, and your break-even point is coming much sooner. What happens if you jumped up to 20,000 kilometers? Again, the savings just keep accumulating. 25,000, there's some people out there that put a lot of kilometers on their vehicle. So, for instance, Frank Deck was one of our guests in our episode 4, and he hauls water for his resort community, and he uses his Chevy Silverado to do so. And I believe he said he's put on 75,000 kilometers in about 2 years. So someone like Frank is going to be saving big bucks by using an electric vehicle. The other thing that he mentioned is that he is part of the Grizzly Charger network, which allows him to get rebates of on his charging, on his home charging. And again, this isn't some kind of gimmick that he gets. This is actually a program that is leveraging policy through the Clean Fuels Fund, the Federal Clean Fuel Fund. And so let's just change off screen here. What happens if he got 3 cents more back on charging at home? What does that bring him to? So again, he gets a couple extra $1,000 a year in his pocket, and he's pretty much saving like right from day one. So I hope that this gives like a little more perspective on the EV business case. And again, it's going to change from vehicle to vehicle and use case to use case, but the real purpose is to help paint an accurate picture as much as possible for those looking to buy a new vehicle. And again, it's going to be based on their unique operating conditions. We're just trying to help people understand what the potential could be, and really taking the conversation from anecdotal discussions to more empirical evidence to help them make decisions. So I'm going to jump out of the spreadsheet here for a moment and just back in, and I want to show you one other element that, again, is a very important factor. So obviously, it's the cost of ownership. The upfront cost is one of the factors that is most impactful. So what if we were to look at a different model? And this is the Chevy Equinox here on the right side of the screen. So The Equinox is now currently priced, the EV model is under $50,000, meaning that that now qualifies for the federal electric vehicle affordability program, where you can get up to $5,000 in rebate over that. So there's that in your favor, but also GM has had some dealer incentives on this particular model throughout the year, and that's making the net price of this almost price parity with the gasoline counterpart. There's only now about $1,500 difference between buying a gasoline Equinox versus the EV version. And you can see the savings with that in Saskatchewan are getting to nearly $13,000. And to, again, help visualize what that looks like, your payment, even with the requirement of having to purchase a home charger, is you're almost within a year now, you're in the positive, and so you're saving money almost right from the get-go. So again, just different perspectives on how this can change from different vehicles here. So um, and one more quick note on this before I move on to talking about charging infrastructure in the province. I haven't talked much about the emissions benefits, but I would like you to, I guess, to consider how impactful EVs can be. So let's consider that each of the 450,000 or so households in the province were to switch out from a gasoline vehicle to a typical EV model, and we'll use the Equinox as an example. The annual emissions reduction in aggregate of all those people, every household switching, would be over 500,000 tons per year. And so, for context, if people are trying to understand what does 500,000 or more tons of carbon capture mean, if you're familiar with the Boundary Dam carbon capture plant in Estevan, where there was an investment of $1.5 billion to make coal clean, to capture the carbon emissions on the coal plant in Estevan. That's pretty close, similar, a little in that ballpark at least of how much emissions you could be capturing. So just a little bit of food for thought, I guess. So you can achieve this amount of emissions reduction, not only at no cost, but with the potential savings of this for each household. So I feel like it's a pretty, if you're interested in the business of promoting low carbon energy solutions like I am, it's pretty easy to understand the appeal of electric vehicles. Okay, so what can we do to help enable Saskatchewan to take advantage of these benefits? As mentioned before, the province has, some decent coverage for EV chargers, although nowhere near the coverage in places like BC or Quebec. But considering that most people will have the ability to charge at home, there's an argument that can be made that many people may already be comfortable with switching to an electric vehicle, especially if you're a multi-vehicle household. You could have one EV in your family fleet and then maintain a conventional fuel if, EV road trips appear to be too risky or too inconvenient for you at this time. However, we do want to help provide the comfort and the complete freedom of electrified travel that we're, wanting people to experience. And so we're going to need to invest more in public EV chargers in the province. So this is another part of our overall campaign here. Outside of our webinars, the work that we're doing in the background is that Aurora is working with, for example, English River First Nations to put charging infrastructure into band-owned properties in the north. That includes Pachinak, La Plonge, Beauval, and Aurora's head office in Grasswood Urban Reserve, just south of Saskatoon. So that's, these chargers here will be going in. And incidentally, at Aurora's headquarters, there's already at least 3 EV drivers that are coming to work every day. The Beauval General Store location will be an important asset to allow travel into the northwest part of the province. There's no fast charger in that particular area, not much north of PA in any direction. So that's going to be an important way to allow travel access into that territory, while the other chargers in the region that we're adding are going to be more on the level 2 side of things. And that's really to support municipal vehicles or vehicles that have a longer dwelling time, which we consider to be an appropriate first step to encourage adoption. And then after that, when adoption increases, we'll look at adding more faster charging infrastructure. So all of these chargers are scheduled to be installed in September of this year. So by the end of September, we hope that all of these will be operational. We are also working with the Lac La Ronge Indian Band to develop a plan for electrified transportation in their communities in north central Saskatchewan. There are two key funding programs available that are supporting this work. The first, or that are available to support this work. The first is the Eco West Municipal Electric Vehicle Initiative. And this is the funding that we have used and leveraged for the chargers that I identified on the last slide, and we're looking to do the same for Lac La Ronge Indian Band. So the other program available is from the Canadian Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and it's the Green Municipal Fund. They have funding available for municipalities to do studies to assess the viability of transitioning their fleet vehicles to zero emission. So they then have subsequent support for capital funding for project implementation. And I'm just going to pull my browser over again to just show a little bit more detail of each of these programs before we move on. A little bit small here maybe, but here's really what you can get from the Eco West program for charging infrastructure. So it really depends on the type of infrastructure you're putting in. So if you're putting in level 2 chargers, you can get up to 50% of the total eligible costs, up to $5,000. If you're an eligible Indigenous business or community, that goes up to 75% and up to $7,500. And that's per connector, so per port. If you're putting in fast chargers, you can get, depending on the level of fast chargers and the speed, you can get all the way up to 75% of eligible funding for up to $99,000 per charger. So, for example, as I mentioned, Beauval, we're putting in an 80 kilowatt charger as the fast charger into that territory. So we're expecting to receive about $75,000 in support for that project. Most of the rest of them are the level 2 chargers where we'll be expecting to get about, 70 up to $7,500 per connector, 75 to cover 75% of our costs. The other program that I mentioned was from the Green Municipal Fund, and this is for studying fleet electrification. So this is about understanding, does it make sense for you to transfer your fleet to electric vehicles? So the base grant amount is 50% of eligible costs up to $200,000. So a fairly significant amount of funding available to do that study. I would note that if you are a smaller community or a northern community, that jumps up to 80% of eligible costs. So any municipality that's under 10,000 people, they get an extra boost on that. And if you're a northern Indigenous community that has never applied to the Green Municipal Fund before, you actually might be eligible up to 100% of costs for that $200,000. So I really encourage any municipalities to take a close look at this because I think that in combination, you can get some significant support to assess your electrified transportation needs. And this funding, again, it's really about assessing the feasibility of transitioning to your municipal fleet. So you can assess your entire fleet or a segment of the fleet, and you're really putting together a plan of what that would look like and to assess the viability of that. So, okay, so with that, I've pretty much come to the end of my content. Just wondering if there's any questions from the audience before we close out here for today. I'll have to jump back in. Does anyone have any questions about the model I presented or anything else of the funding? Please feel free to enter anything into the chat right now. So Lori, question, what happens if someone runs out of power? Is there something equivalent to a jerry can, or do tow trucks have recharging capabilities? I believe there are technologies that are available. I wouldn't say so much as carrying a jerry can, but I have seen mobile refueling trailers that people can move around. So I was at the EV show in Toronto this year, and there's a couple different groups that are selling trailers that, a tow truck company or someone could have. Um, the interesting thing is, range anxiety is one of the big things that people that are not familiar with EV ownership are most concerned about. But I think it's really just a learning experience, and the vehicles do a really good job of directing you, whether you can make the trip or not, or which chargers you should have to stop, you should be stopping at. So it's really more so on the trip planning aspect of things. Granted, there isn't the infrastructure in place. But again, before you purchase an EV, you really want to understand what your use case is and understand where the charging infrastructure is. I mean, there's 6,000 or so people in the province that own EVs. So it's not, well, that's not a huge amount. It's not an insignificant amount. And, I've never heard of anyone that's run out of charge. There's a few people who have talked about close calls before. But really, again, it's just a change in behavior to understand what your capabilities are and how you operate that. Doug Beckett, can you power your house with your EV when you have a power outage? There is the potential that can be done. So there is certain vehicles that have what's called vehicle to load or vehicle, essentially to grid. I think that's kind of still in the emerging technology side of things. I honestly don't know a lot about it at this point. You would need to have your house to be able to set up to allow for that to backfeed into your house. So there might be some requirements for an electrician to allow that to happen. But yes, that's a technology that I think is becoming more popular and more used, and people are actually starting to see as, these are grid assets that the grid can actually use to call on for power. Um, if there's a power outage or a strain on the grid, even, again, a lot of people talk about mileage concerns or things like that. But the reality is for a lot of people, their vehicles are parked 90% of the time. So you're either plugged in and charging and have a full charge, or as Doug's alluding to, you might have the potential to be selling power back to your utility, or to use it for any power outage that you might have. So I think it's a bit of a tricky question to say a yes or no into, other than to say that you will be getting um, the opportunity, I think, in the future as the technology advances, that it's going to become more common. So Michael says, can you go over again and share the link on Aurora Renewables where I could find the links to your EV resource? Sure. I'll just pull up that website again, and I'll bring it over on screen. So you can go to aurorarenewables.ca/EV-campaign/. Do I have an opinion on, Lori, this is Lori again. Do I have an opinion on or information on hybrids? So yeah, I have. There is information. So I think each of these EV finders also include plug-in hybrids and electric and fully battery electric. So you can explore each of the plug-in hybrid models. If you're referring to just hybrid models that aren't plug-in, that are, they might just have a small battery that does some regenerative braking. Each of them, again, it's really preference, and I would encourage you to do a comparison of each one. Um, if you feel that it's too risky to jump into a battery electric vehicle, I would encourage you to take a look at some of the hybrid models that are out there. But I'd also really encourage you to take a closer look at what your use case would be for a battery electric vehicle. And again, especially if you're a multifamily vehicle, I really don't know if there would be much of a challenge in owning at least one fully battery electric vehicle at this time. Unless both of you or all vehicles in your household are making long remote trips frequently. But again, for me, we bought our first electric vehicle just last year, so we were maybe, a little bit late in the adoption curve. We ended up buying a used EV. We found it to be affordable. We probably don't even drive all that much. So, range isn't an issue, but we also maybe not get the economic benefits because our mileage is low. But I can just speak to, the pleasure, I guess, of driving an electric vehicle. All that performance that we talked about in the specifications are very much true. They're excellent vehicles. We plug in ours at home, so ultra convenient. We've almost never had to use a public charger because we use it mostly for errands. So yeah, I would almost suggest starting with looking at a battery electric vehicle and seeing if there's for one reason or another that it just doesn't fit your need. So Doug Beckett, for cold weather areas, I would suggest you avoid a plug-in hybrid. EVs start in cold weather, such as -40, because they have a battery warmer. Not all plug-in hybrids may be able to start in cold weather. So, some people say that plug-in hybrids are the worst of both worlds, but again, I think it's down to each individuals because you've got the two systems, but everyone's going to have their opinions on that, and I guess I would hate to impose mine on anyone else without knowing your specific conditions for that. Sorry, Michael, back to that page here. Again, all your resource library. Actually, the next page here in my presentation probably has that written out a little bit bigger. Please keep the questions coming if you've got them. I'm just going to also talk about our next webinar here coming in September. So we're actually going to be switching gears a little bit this time, and we're going to be talking about clean fuels. And so we're going to be talking to a couple different companies that are working to develop hydrogen as a clean fuel. So this is going to be called Beyond Batteries. And we're looking to talk with Terry Howe, the VP of Commercial Development from HTEC, and Jared Sayers, who is the president and CEO of Azola Hydrogen. And they've both been doing work with developing hydrogen fueling stations, particularly for heavy duty transportation applications. So scan to register for that event next Wednesday, or sorry, next month, Wednesday, September 23rd. Feel free to scan this registration code right now, and that'll give you the opportunity to register. If not, you can jump back into our website later on and find that. And again, keep an eye on our LinkedIn pages and back at the website for any more information. We are getting close to the end of our time, but if there's any more questions, feel free to shoot them in. If not, we will look to close things off here. So thanks again for people for joining. Appreciate the engagement and the questions, all very good. And again, if you've got any more questions, take a look at that resource library. Feel free to reach out to us through our website, and we'll try to help provide you with steer you in the right direction of where you can find the information. And please keep an eye on us on our campaign, and we'll hope to provide some updates in the next couple months that I've got those charging stations operational and expanding that network to allow for more transportation of electric vehicles into the north. And please, anyone else who's, spread the information about this to your local communities. Those programs that are available, I think people are unfortunately maybe not taking advantage of what is out there. So I would say that we would really encourage communities to start looking at how they can transition their fleets, but also add charging stations in their communities to help expand this network as well. Before we sign off here, Lori, one more comment. Said our local dealership had trouble keeping the Mavericks in stock when the gas prices started to go up. So is the Maverick, is that one of the hybrid vehicles, Lori? I mean, I'm sure, yeah, so it is. And I would say that, yeah, definitely, gas prices have really started making people take a second look at, how they can reduce their cost of fuel. And, full battery electric is obviously the best way to do that because it has the most impact. But There's options out there. So again, take a look at some of those resources and shop around and ask your dealers. And more importantly, talk to people that are EV owners. They'll give you the goods on it. This isn't they'll know wouldn't want to steer you in the wrong direction, I don't think, and make your experience difficult. So they're enthusiastic about it. They love to share their stories. So again, feel free to reach out to Sask EV or the Sask Electric Vehicle Association for more assistance on that beyond our campaign as well. So, but with that, we are a little bit over time here, so I'm going to wrap things up. Thanks again so much for everyone for joining in, and we hope to see you next time.